Hello, Eric.
Hey, so in English.
So we talk in English.
Okay. I'm Eric, director of Youth Leader magazine, and I'm meeting with Heiner Benking, futurist, dialogue facilitator, many different things. And we're meeting on occasion, sorry for this, of 48 Hours New Cologne. And you see on the picture, it's a 2-page art festival with more than 300 events throughout the district of New Cologne, which is a part of Berlin. And this year's topic is creating paradises. Or it is Final Station Paradise. So I'm already referring to our topic because we're having roundtable discussions about creating paradises. And yesterday and this morning we were talking about what paradise means, and that it's basically a global, thriving, sustainable civilization that every one of us co-creates, because then you have the divine spark, your own passion in it, and this attracts possibilities, solutions, contexts to create the world you wish to see around yourself. And as you can see here, these paradise gardens and these futures are very lush, and also the powerful beings in it not necessarily prey on the others. So we can really have a harmonious civilization. And we were talking about the trim tab, which is like a pivot, a very little thing at the end of a ship, and you have the rudder, and the rudder can be very huge, like in a big ocean steamer. You have a huge rudder, several meters high, tons heavy. But there's a little thing, the trim tab, which works with low pressure and which just needs to do a little effort to change the course and the direction of the rudder and to change the course of the industrial Titanic from unsustainability and going down the waterfall to a thriving, sustainable future. So we're talking, what is this trim tab for facilitating a change of course for our civilization? And we said it's inspiration, like what makes your heart shine, what makes you passionate to do things and become a co-creator of the world around you. And we also said it's dialogue. Dialogue, co-creative dialogue between people to have cooperation and a shared future to which we together want to work in our families, in our neighborhoods, in our societies, and on the planet. And here's someone who's been working with this for like 20, 30 millennia, and you're holding an event with some people, co-creating paradises during 48 hours. Yeah, shoot ahead. What are your thoughts about the topic? You're much into global issues, harmonization from United Nations to cultures and small local communities. And you're very much concerned that the way we have to talk together and to shape decisions has to be very different from how it's done so far in small circles or parliaments. And this is, for example, why you're taking the dialogue from round tables inside buildings outside to the park.
Yes.
Why?
We are meeting on magic carpets. We have done it before with European youth conferences, and normally we do magic roundtables, because then we sit in a round, maybe 7 or 12 people in a circle, but even large circles, and we do it to really, as you say, come to a sharing, caring, daring, joint mobilization of what can we co-create and jointly do, futures creation we say. And this means that we first have to come to some rules. Nobody can speak at the same time, for example. And there is only limited time in a group. Maybe they stay for 1 hour or for 1 day or for 1 week, but it must be clear how much time there is available. And so what we do, we assemble people in a circle and say nobody has speaking time. Speaking time can only be given to you as a present. So it's an empowerment, it's a giving voice. The traditions say 2 ears, 1 mouth. And if we sit like the Indians, American Indians do, in a cycle, they use a talking stick. And this is a fantastic method, so we can learn a lot from the old. But what do we do when there are many, many people and all want to talk? And if they hold a talking stick, they can talk as long as they want, and then they put the talk in the middle. So this is very good to really appreciative and cultivating attention and compassion. But we do it also with talking sticks, but imagine a talking stick out of ice, so it can melt in your imagination. So we give in a circle, everybody, like circle of 20 people, everybody we give 3 talking stick or 3 coasters or any unit, so we know all together we share 60 minutes here together. And then we make an introductory, or first we do an introductory round that everybody really turns in 1 minute, half a minute, makes an offer to the group, something he would like to share from his heart or from his mind, to really say what he feels might be good for the others. So it's a sharing cycle of proposals. And then we say, please give the talking units, maybe it's a stick, maybe it's a stone, or whatever you want.
There was a bowl of candy over there, so if you have 60 little candies, you distribute 3 candies each, and then you give candies to others.
Yes.
I like the candy idea because then it really comes as a gift to someone that these are minutes for you to speak to the group.
Candies have much benefit. So if you eat the candy, you don't have to speak.
You're finished more early.
You can throw coasters under the table, so we are earlier finished, or you can eat your sweets. So this is an open, self-organized, transparent, dynamic, empowering method where people learn to listen and learn when to speak up and to be short and to speak at the same time. I speak about attention ecology. So attention is building up, and when he says something interesting, I can build on it. So we, like a dance or like a ping pong, it is a joint flow of information, and I think this is really what is needed in group. It's co-creation, that you either invent something at home, but maybe getting the kicks from the group, or you jointly play around with fantasy to have such a work session. And we call this method Magic Roundtable. It is an open forum method, so it's like the open space, an open, self-organized format to really come to another form of what we say in German Stammtisch. Stammtisch is where the people in the town hall or in the beer bar know each other and they're on equal eye height. So they have their possibility that everybody can speak. May it be the preacher, may it be the mayor, may it be the farmer. So they have equal voice. And this Stammtisch 2.0 is something what we do in real Wirklichkeit dialogues. So in dialogues, in any kind of gathering or setting, maybe even as a part of the open space methodology. Or we do it virtually when we use virtual conferencing, and there it is much needed because you cannot really see into the other eyes. You cannot see how he is reacting, and so it is very important. You might have come to a virtual conference already, that they all try to speak at the same time and they don't know when to really come into deep dialogue. So my challenge is deep, compassionate, co-creative dialogue to really empower and harvest the best and the brightest of the ideas.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to come back to the method and to put it in the context of open space and others. I like that you say with these tokens there's more attention when you're speaking, like when you hold the stick, and also when others are speaking, so you really listen. And normally people don't listen so much or just come with their own message. Everybody just wants to say this is good or this is bad, this is my opinion. What is different in your experience, for example, with the outcome? So how actually does it start? People give tokens from, let's say, 60 minutes, 20 people, each has 3 tokens, and they give them to some people. Some might get a lot of tokens, others just 1 or 2, maybe you keep your own, and then how does it start? Just to give us a feel.
Well, a group can control it on its own, but it's much better to have a moderator to make sure that the people learn the rules of the game. And this moderator makes sure nobody is speaking which has not got a received token as a present. And if someone ran out of token, it is never antagonistic and exclusive and pushing someone out saying you cannot speak anymore, but to kindly ask others, do you still want this person to continue, and give him speaking time for that.
Mm-hmm. And
then if someone gives this person another 2 minutes to finish his sentence, then it's fine.
Okay.
So it's about tactics and strategies when you say something, and if you can make your point, and if you see something I received from her, very, very interesting attention. She's looking in my eyes, she's listening to me, and she gave me a lot of time. But I can always give her time to him or to her. And so it is building up. So imagine a valley with high mountains around. And these mountains are 17 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 and 3. And in the end, what's coming out, I always say surprising nature, surprising groups, you don't know. I had it happen when an elder got 25, 30 minutes, and he always gave it to others because he wanted to learn and listen.
Yeah,
and so very, very smart, talented person, very often women, children, do not dare to speak up. But if the group empowers them, it is really magic. That's why we call it magic roundtables.
Okay, and I like what you said because it goes by what people really want to hear. So if you have something of value that other people are really interested in, want to hear, to learn something, instead of just being a speaker on the podium or on a list of speakers on the conference, or just having their own open space session and the other don't hear you, you really ask questions, and so it really comes out what is the interest of the group and not of the 3 booked main speakers.
Yes.
And you can be surprised, like in open space, all the participants are experts. You might not expect these things from people, but in the first introduction round they say where you're coming from, and then suddenly the expert may be really surprised by a teenager working on a great project and things and not
having great ideas, and never having an audience and media to listen to them. But this is something like the cradle, the incubator of really supporting change. And our problem in this society, David Bohm, who did this Bohm Dialog, so we are basing very much on Martin Buber and David Bohm and the old traditions. This David Bohm wrote 2 last books on creativity and on dialogue. So you see this Einstein professor, very renowned, very special person, did in the end cycles where groups convene and really go beyond their psychic tensions and their karma to really come and join into a broader group. And this power, where he said, we really come to attentive listening, we still have a problem. He said, our problem is how to stop the talkers. And this message was brought by Robert Jung into the database of social innovations with Nicholas Elbury in London to really co-create and empower people to feel strong, to be supported. So people who never get the voice in the audience sometimes glow like a flower. So I invented it late in the night because it was all big potatoes, all really macho elbow talkers, generals, secret service, politicians, industrialists, civil society, all being able to talk for hours but not listening. And if you want to work with them together, I at 4 o'clock in the night made a decision to make a difference, like you just said with this pivot. I said, gentlemen, this is it. It's 4 o'clock in the night. We have to discuss a press release the other morning. The media is coming. But we cannot come to a point because you don't listen, you don't discuss. There is no deliberation and evaluation. Maybe this with that wording. Everybody is doing his pitch. And this pitching nowadays is very modern in modern youth groups. They like to make their pitch. And you do the same with poetry slams since long time. But you are pushed out one after the other, and if you had your 2 minutes or 3 minutes, you're thrown off the stage.
Yeah, and
this is not quality growing.
Yeah, that's it. And on all these social entrepreneurship pitches, then you got a jury and says, those 3 of the 20 are the coolest, they get the money. I don't know. It should be improved, you know. Okay,
but let's speak about improvement now.
Yeah, like also decision making. I was gonna ask how about decision making? There are people sharing ideas, getting to know about other things and learning. Decision making is one of your points. Which other is currently?
Let's talk about deliberation and decision making, because it is very important that the people not just sit together or just vote when they don't know what they're voting about. And I recently learned about a project where the European Community Commission, they were looking for tools to evaluate what kind of funding strategies they should do with ICT, information communication technologies, to really support the handicapped. And they have done it in the past, sitting with his elders around the table, and the most eminent, with the most publication, is taking his part of the pie, of the billions or whatever, or millions, and the other, who is a little less eminent, maybe has enough followers to agree that he's another piece of the share. But they're all only doing their turf. And there, they applied a message. When I learned about it, I was really, really impressed. You see, the founders of the Club of Rome, and I'm speaking here now about 42 years ago, I mean, when the original ideas were born of the Club of Rome, it was about the predicament of mankind and problematique, to really look into, not as it is now, that they think, oh, we do modeling and we know these resources are scarce and there's a doomsday apocalypse coming, because everybody knows obvious things. I call it overclaims and oversimplifications, that you cannot eat the same apple 3 times, that water is limited when you drink it, then it's not there anymore, you see. But to really make a difference, it needs more. They say in this report, we need futures creation, which means not just prognostic futures, maps, models, scenarios, but normative and participatory futures. Normative means values and frames and order and directions and orientation. And participatory means that you really look into a dialogue method, that you in an exchange, in a deliberation format, come to shared values you can all agree upon in consensus, like the old traditions have been doing, and not just do blind voting. So what happened was end of May 1970, it was a well-known clash of methods. This Club of Rome split apart, a bifurcation, and only the people who were in models and scenarios, taking the big money and getting all this funding, but all the other work being done before on looking into the sharing and the deliberation and the dialogue, they were out of the project even when they did 3-4 years work on that. So there was a very tension time, because it's very important if we believe we can predict the future, or we know we better be a little bit more humble and decent, that there are many futures and we have to share and create them. Mm-hmm. So these people did the Academy of Contemporary Problems, they did the technology assessment, and really developed further this thinking on collaboration, on participation and dialogue. And they had a hard time, because it is very hard to find ways that groups together come to common grounds. And so, who was listening? American Indians. So the Institute of American Opportunities, the head of all North American tribes, they had problems with their neighbors, with other tribes, with the central government, and they were looking for a method where they don't vote, but in their tradition, listen, be attentive, and really jointly elaborate the solution space. Because if the problem space is gigantic and overwhelming, what can you do? You have at least create another solution space. And I'm not speaking about a solution opposition like good, bad, yes or no, and putting issues into a line, one after the other, but to go into a method of an authentic listening and anticipation, where you find the people, after they learn to listen to each other, to have people give an approach and what they mean and elaborate that meaning. And then in this consensus method, it is called structured dialogic design, they then find out what the other is meaning. And after they have found out what the other meaning is, they are trying to find out, is this factor influencing that one? And that factor that one? And then they come to a roots tree, something like a hierarchy of various elements. What is the source? What is really influencing this, and deeper and deeper? And so through this deliberation, they come to common roots, to common ground, and they discuss the scales, proportion, consequences. But the important thing is that when has much to do with the dialogue and democracy discussions today, when you just are invited to vote, yes, no, make a cross here, make a cross there, it is not enough. But if you vote on influences, then totally different results happen. And they have studied this now for a long time. It's called erroneous priority principle. Kenneth Dye is one of the leading persons behind that. Then you see that not only an individual, but also a group can change its mind. And we have experienced it with my colleague in this first gatherings with the Indians. She was a Western having a different standpoint, so she was different. But it is important to have all the different stakeholders, all the different voices on the table. And if someone has a different thing, different opinion, different approach, then the other people are interested to learn, to come to a consensus. And there, in such method, it then happened when it is explained that they change their mind. And this ability to let your own viewpoint out, that is the most magic, again, when I speak here, what can be happening in group and societies, that we can learn. And I think this learning is what we have to explore. And this group, we have a 21st Century Agoras group, and it's the Agoras group. They are working to really make peace projects, not only in Cyprus or in Palestine or around the Pacific with the Maoris, to really come to understanding, finding out the meaning, and then come, as I said before, sharing, caring, and jointly daring.
And sometimes I feel like, because these things to some people may seem abstract or very new, complex, difficult to follow, this is why I like to respond with simply some imagery, like from an eagle's view, put things into perspective, and maybe you can tell me whether it's an okay image, whether I'm right
or wrong.
Yeah,
I don't argue anymore. That's the song.
Is that like what you said about the Methodenstreit and the futures, the way things are handled by the people in the Club of Rome, the group that pushed through their opinion on what kind of future sciences should be used, versus other groups whose methods were not to be used, instead of using both. So that's really a pretty ignorant old model of making decision. Just because 2 got funding, for example, instead of 6, But so it seems like these with the prognostic futures, saying what is going to happen, that seems in future sciences seems to go mostly by trends. This is where the trend is heading, this is where we are getting. Very linear. But if you go into the participative futures, it means, look, then you take in other things that future sciences have. The future is coined by trends, by decisions, by surprises, like a volcano, you don't know, and then by our visions, the images we have of the future. And you can be, and everybody knows this from their own thinking. If you think, I'm going to the subway station in half an hour, you have the image, and you're going there. If you say, I want to build a house with a garden and 3 trees, that's the first thing. You make an image of your future next year, if you have the money together. Or, I envisage going to the Caribbean for my holidays, or whatever. This is how I want my future to be. And the same way, what kind of images do we actually hold of the future of our societies? There's some, like, all kind of Star Wars, Star Trek stuff. For example, the cities of the future. It's awful stuff. Most are just these cold, there's not even a tree, man. It's like desert destroyed planets with all 500,000 story things and funny toys. And that means that could be a trend, that actually we're making decisions to create the future or live in the moon instead of creating paradise right here. And the other thing is, if we want a sustainable future, is it going to be a fascist state? It might still be ecologically sustainable, with a top-down dictator or a new god king, and the rest are just castes like in old India? Or do we want a thriving democratic future? That's hardly discussed in sustainability discussions. So do we want a scorched planet run with robots, or do we want one that's more thriving with like a paradisical garden? And if we have this vision, then we can start thinking about doing those things, and we can also evaluate, okay, is another depleted uranium war on some parts of the planet really taking us on the track to the paradise future, or more to the scorched planet? And it seems that this, and then we could better evaluate decisions today and show, look, they might be arguing this war or these GMOs are important, but maybe it doesn't take us for sure on the road to a good future in 50 years. So, and I have the impression that the future shaping or decision that the Club of Rome decided to go for is rather this old way of just looking at trends and what a few people, old people in industry and government say, okay, we want this kind of model of stuff, and that's a very narrow and very old-fashioned, dusty future. And I have the impression, this is the second thought that I had when you were talking about democracy, that this is really not the way to go, of this old-fashioned, a few old decision-makers future.
People pulling the strings.
Yeah, just a few people pulling the strings. It's people who are only talking, who are not listening, and that means they haven't learned all the information that has bubbled over the past 40 years. They don't know this. They even grew up in times of racism with no environmental education, and they haven't gone through they don't know of so many new things. And it reminds me of the time, the step before parliamentary democracy, when we had kings. It was like if monarchists discussed the future of a society that just doesn't function. If you look back at Europe, there was war all the time. So it really didn't work. Things were getting destroyed. There was so much suffering. So if the monarchs decide in Industrial Revolution what is going to happen, where their decisions was there's a few rich people, the nobility, and there's the poor mob. So we know what happened. The majority of society said, that's not a good model. We want it to be different. So there were revolutions by the majority of the people with the workers' rights and so on, looking for proper living conditions. And then they had parliamentary democracy because these people wanted to have some decision in parliament. But the parliamentary democracy of parties is really old. It's almost 100 years old. You have the workers' people, like the socialists. You had some of the guys who had the big businesses, and then you had the monarchists. And now you have they added a few who are for green stuff. But this model is so old and things are so much more complex today. And it's like these old party model people, which we are so fed up with, that always one party is right or wrong, and if they have a good idea, I'm still going to vote against it because it's not my party, I don't want them to have the credit in government. That's so bad. And again, it's only, I don't know, it's not even 1% of the society that is in these parties, like for real, and then you may have like maybe 10% who are in the party, and the rest doesn't care about the party. So I guess the next step of the stream is to become more diverse, have many more voices, not the king anymore, not the parties anymore, but what you're talking about, that next co-creative dialogue with lots of people to come to decisions which are understood by people, which are supported by people, even if it was not their idea. And for this we need methods and structures. Because I think many people hear this and think, I can't follow. And I say, it's right. It's new stuff. But it's necessary because the old party democracy model of big potatoes from way ago cannot find the solutions needed for a co-creative future as a thriving participatory society. I mean, that's what Buckminster Fuller, I read it yesterday, wrote in like 1970. I don't know how the quotation is, but he said that the mindset of politicians has nothing to do, has no role to play in creating a new sustainable society. And I think this is what you're talking about, and this is why hardly any one of us has grown up with understanding, okay, what's this dialogue and group decision model is going to be like? And like back then, when we learned democracy, like in the United States, there was monarchists now thinking, how are we going to have dialogue? They learned from the 7 nations of the Iroquois Federation, their great law of peace, where people had different ways of doing the dialogue, and they had these rules that only one may speak and everybody has to be silent. This is why in the US you never hear anybody muttering during somebody talking in parliament, whereas in Italy they all go freakish and scream and study all the time, even get into fights, because they didn't pick up that rule. But the American white monarchists, they, for example, they didn't pick up the Native American rule that the women can impeach the president. So there was no women involved in white man's politics. So I noticed this, that back then, 200 years ago, we learned from old traditions how to do more functional dialogue, and it's still in its baby shoes, our democracy, after monarchy. And now you mention again, we should learn from old ancient traditions, but also from Asia and other continents, and the old Greek tradition, to create this more developed, maybe it's teenage days, democracy.
So let me continue. You see, our Magic Round Table is encouraging interruptions, but every interruption is at least a fraction of a minute. So a minute goes away, so you learn that you can ping pong very, very fast and dynamic, but as you interrupt someone, you're stealing his line of thought, and so it is taking away some of the time. He can maybe try to collect his thought again, to really come to because the rest of that interruption goes to him. But let me go deeper.
I mean, did it make sense what I said? Sort of?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay,
sure.
Just to make sure we share the direction.
If we go into other traditions of state building and society building, you might have read in your child time the 1001 Fairy Tales.
Didn't like them so much.
Von Harun al-Rashid. There is a story where Harun al-Rashid is about to die, and Harun al-Rashid was always in disguise, going to the market and speak with the people and learn what they think and all this. So I'm thinking a circle of elders or a king or a parliament can be all good in their time, because they knew, taking their own viewpoint out, how to look for the who, like the Chinese emperor in charge of giving the time and looking into the infliction of suffering, being responsible for long time frames. So there's an art of governance, I learned by Ralph Seo, who started also the Institute of Contemporary Problems, that you as a governor have to look into the infliction of suffering. So when you do something, you have to know not only how much it costs, bottom line, how many dollars, but also how many suffering might be caused by this. It's called infliction of suffering, short suffering, long suffering, suffering over generations. And he created a dukkha schema to really visualize and embody the suffering caused by human impact and also by natural impact. But when we are doing a human caused impact, we know what might be the long range issues connected with that. So Hans Jonas, in his philosophy of the ethics of responsibility, he said, we in future have to envision the ethics with space and time horizon. Or Gregory Bateson, like Bucky, all big thinkers for me, he said we need antennas for time horizons, looking into the lifespan of a tree and a wood, because we have no feeling that it sometimes takes some generations to have a good oak tree to really build a large house. And so we have to look not just for us, but and just episodically, but epochally. And so these time frames are very, very important for me. But that is another story on cognitive spaces and my cognitive panorama. I missed the story of Harun al-Rashid. So when he was about to die, it was a huge empire with different nations from everywhere. His son Manu took over. And Manu, he really had all these other nations around fighting and taking the whole beautiful and very advanced civilization apart. This Manu had very wise advisors, and they told him, you only have one chance, because they all have their own interests, their own ego, looking for their own country and turf and benefit. You select the most brightest and most artistic jewelers, masonries and whatever, and you bring them together, and behind the mihrab in the mosque there was a very special place, and there they were supposed to create a fantasy town, a future town, the most beautiful, the most amazing, the most rich, the most ecological, artistic, aesthetic and whatever town, and you have them build that, and then you give them a lot of money and tell them to go as far as possible and never talk about this. And then you let every of the fighting and rivaling nations and states and tribes come, tell them they have to be secret, to show them the future vision city, how we want to create a beautiful orchard, organic, sustainable, what all these words are now today. They had it already in their tradition. This will be the future town we are building, or the future society. So you give them a vision. Mission, vision, action, I always say. So to give them an idea and tell them silent. You never tell anyone about this. And send them back and come with the other rivals or the other tribes or the other competitors. And they all tell about this. This will be the most interesting. This is fantastic, and there will be a new paradise. We are here at a paradise conference or a festival for 2 days. So they create a shared vision. And what happened over, I think, another 7 generations, this, you call it dynasty, much different from the Roman Empire, survived. And we had all the beautiful artistry of this Middle East Arab culture. You can now say, well, there are also Chinese cultures, and definitely they should all come together to create positive futures, shared visions. And to go on this way of futures creation and imagination, I think I just mentioned before stupidity, which is overclaims and oversimplifications. What we need is sharedness, and this means shared orientation and shared overview. And we don't learn in school there is a common map. There is no idea that it is possible to have overview. And I feel this is one of the most central things I think we have to observe in schools, that it is possible to have overview. You just go a few steps back and see a model from all angles and move around, And with UNESCO we called it Bring Together Me, We, You, They and Other Models to really negotiate, as I just mentioned, the different positions and perspectives. So I feel this need to dumb people down, not just with technology and media, but by making them small, that is the Freudian blow. We are peanuts, we are little, we cannot have overview. This is all dogma, and we have to overcome through this fixed ideas we learn in certain cultures, where other cultures have the idea which is comprehensive and holistic. So I think Western civilization, the modern technological society, has to learn a lot from the old and include the potentials of the news. And as we just mentioned, this virtual reality has pros and cons, and we have to come to not just use a mobile, but still learn to create mental models and maps to share differences without excluding others. Excuse me, it was a long trip.
Yeah, I have something to add to the trip. Because you started out with governments and decision making, the emperor goes by how much suffering is inflicted. And it reminds me that the United Nations also say that a good king can be better than a bad democracy. Bhutan, for example, has a really good king. The people even wanted to keep him, but he said, no, I'm stepping back. I want everyone to responsibly care, be a steward of the country of Bhutan. And so he said, I want every one of you to learn democracy. Now they have a parliament. The Harun al-Rashid guy was a good king then. Manu, who went to listen also to the people and to do these things. So it's, if you have a good King Arthur who is really listening to his Merlins and all the super wise people who know so much more than him, because he has to do with all kind of deal with other stuff. He cannot be on the top level of many of the avant-garde of sciences, but maybe he as a generalist can understand when the really wise Socrates and Merlins explain to him, you know. So he has to be learned, but you need the really good advisors. And today's decision makers, they are not so learned, they're not really listening to impartial advisors often, but by other lobbyists. And then the reduction of suffering. What do I care about? How other people suffer. So what do you care about? And then you know there's people who care different about whether other people suffer or not. You even see it on a family level. Some hit their children, you couldn't do it. You see it by teachers who are being really tough on school students, which you might not be able to do. Or maybe you are one of those who is so tough. Then you see other young people bullying others and you say, I couldn't do this. But some people can. And in the adult sphere, some are throwing napalm on people and some are doing schemes for controlling the world food supply and all kinds of stuff. So empathy is not fully present in many people's consciousness. And isn't this the reason why there's so much call for education for empathy in schools now, in progressive schools and in the new curricula, to nurture empathy in people? So if this is new, how about the older generations? To what degree did they really have empathy to commit the atrocities they have committed in Europe, or that they are committing today in different parts of the world towards women, children, and so on? So if you have a king with no empathy, it's really no good. So what about our decision makers? How much empathy is there? And there's a lot of neuroscience and brain science by Gerhard Hüther and others, who's a new pope of German neuroscience, who is being booked for speeches everywhere now, big business, politics, education, because the knowledge that's been there for 50 years, he's explaining it in a clear way. And he's showing them, look, you need to grow up in a certain way in school, in learning, with creativity, with passion, so your mind can learn. It can only learn and click its synapses when it's done with good feelings. This is not what the generations in the past or many of today are experiencing in school. And then the other thing is that you can only be a straight personality if you have learned to take responsibility and risk and challenge in your upbringing between age 0 and 20. Now, to what degree have the past generations and today's experienced that? And he actually says that you can only be an honorable person if you have gone through this. And he said that the decision makers of today in economy and politics don't have that. And that many parts of their mind are inactive. And this includes the empathic parts. Oh, that's really tough news, but it's an explanation why people really make decisions about shrinking footprints, maybe, but now it's about enlarging our handprint, creating the world we want, and this relates to our mind print, our thinking, which you know from good, bad, and all kinds of things, you know. Anwar Chowdhury, the captain of the UN Decade for a Culture of Peace, said we have to change our thinking, not just non-violent acts, but also non-violent thinking, and this is really complex. And then when we're talking about empathy, it's your heart print. It's the worldview. And there's a saying culture is like an iceberg. It is the unseen aspects, and that's like 80%, of the iceberg is underwater. It is the unseen aspects that create and influence the seen ones. So the unsustainable behavior of violence, of self-destruction, of overconsumption and all this, are just symptoms of a way bigger thing to deal with. And this goes to the mind print and the heart print. And the technological, economical worldview of dominance, of empire for the past 5,000 years, that's a tough heritage. And so you find the other ways with the Native Americans, with the savages, who even say, I would rather die than to be a slave to another man, because there's no death, and I will not be subject or object to anyone else. There are some languages that don't even have an imperative. They cannot say, you do this and that. So if you look at Europe, the Arab world and China, this is for 5,000 years, it's like their proud thing, the imperator, the imperative telling everybody what to do. If you don't follow, you get your head cut off. And now it's a few big potatoes with really big bellies in their fat, getting emotional, with a big egos, fighters in the party democracies. So it's still this old paradigm. You see, I'm in this with heart and passion, and it hurts me, it makes me angry, but it makes me angry because it hurts me. The anger is only when you're hurt about something. And I really care about what's happening with the world, and I say, if this heart print doesn't change the worldview, what belongs to me, It's things like we have only inherited the future from our children. We have to make every decision so it doesn't negatively impact the next 7 generations. I'm now speaking as a Native American. And this doesn't include only the 7 generations of human beings that you may talk about, that you may think about, the 2-legged, but also the 4-legged, and the winged people, and the swimming people, and the standing people, the trees, because for the Native American, it's not only alive, it's alive, but he feels for it like relatives. It's all relatives. You don't cut Mother Earth. It's not just a name or a concept, Mother, but it's the feeling. And in their rituals, you really experience the feeling towards the planet as Mother. You see, that is unknown to most people from industrial civilizations, from the are you more robots? Are we more robots? I used to be like this. So I got deprogrammed and made these other experiences. How can you actually feel and relate to the living universe around us? It's a big thing. and it's not taught in normal schooling. So nurture a new decision-making culture from a worldview which is connected to a set of ethical values, to the 12 or 13 ethical values that are in all cultures, but so I feel them and I transmit those through my decision-making as a lifestyle. This is the way how these actions are born, you know? You got that worldview and it's felt with the senses and appreciation and love for everything, so I care for it. And then I live the 13 values of cooperation, love, and so on. And then comes a sustainable lifestyle. It's not the other way around. In the past years, they wanted to advocate, everybody do a sustainable lifestyle. But they don't, because they don't care. They said, you've got to have your ethics. Well, the ethics for most people are just words, they're not experienced. And below that is the worldview. That I can do stuff with whatever I want. So, and that is coined in the old memes and thinking patterns we have inherited in the language, military language and everything,
You also did a long tour.
Yeah, that was a long tour. I say to change stuff, it's really about a whole new thing, and I say the adult generation can't do it.
So you see, we are both very full, and sometimes it's a red herring. We never come to an end. But let me make two maybe final remarks. First, mindprint, handprint, heartprint. There's a mindprint TV web page in the internet, so we can go deeper there. There is something on the way we communicate and present. Simple icon index, different ways of representation, like different senses. We as humans have a body, so the touch, the feel, the sight, all the senses, like the vertical sense for gravity, it shows that all this have to be in harmony and they have been connected, and that is much of my work having much to do with patterns and fields and going to three-dimensional embodied representations. Just to add to yours, I wanted to finalize on, as we try to talk on societal and individual decision and dialogue and deliberation technologies, I would like to really have someone revisit the consultative. That was a mediation approach developed in the early 90s. I know it as I was in the founding board, to really have an ordered schema where, against all the lobbyists who always sell something, and then they get another study, and then they buy another opinion. So it is not fair, it is not equal. In German we say Gutachterunwesen. It's probably not possible to translate, but it's a guy you buy to give you a certain opinion you order with your contract. So I really advise you to check into such ordered schemas that some people cannot control decisions by always postponing and going to the next court. There is a moderator who really gives a voice to everybody who is a stakeholder, who is a risk taker, who is a driver, and not an observer. So you see, I looked also for Robert Jung's 80th birthday into all these participatory methods like Planungszelle, like open space, like Zukunftswerkstatt, future labs, and I think there is such a treasure. And let me end up with saying the most interesting I learned recently, that the people around Occupy looked into how large groups signal consent. So we just had at the Brandenburg Gate an event with Google and the Speakers Corner to really show alternative approaches in society. And there I summed up that, for example, the Occupy in their communities have signaling languages like I agree, or stop, or you're always repeating yourself, let your ego go away. So through widening the communication span, it is very much needed to come to other decisions. And please follow up on that, because all wisdom conditions, all other traditions, they had very often gestures, signs like the blind or the Braille alphabet of the blind people. There are totally more different ways to communicate than we use today. We just do alphanumerics and draw the bottom line. I really invite you to check into all these consensus methods, because this dualistic, blind and dumb approaches are dumping us down, and they're not helping us to create positive shared futures. And this is all what it is about, to create paradises and orchards which are livable, and not say one problem and we have everything solved, like some people say now. We just reduce the population by 90% and everything is solved. No, this is not the thing. Our mind change has to come. And you mentioned mind change and heart change. All these changes have to come together. And I really invite you to go to our video TV channel, Mindprint TV. Thank you, Eric. It's been a really, really rough ride. And it's so deep, we should slice it into a few parcels.
Yeah, that was a nice final short remark from your side. I'll add a short one from my side. And you reminded me, like with the Arab states now, now they got democracy. Sorry for you guys, democracy, now what? So you got these old guys in black and white, like from hundreds of years ago, offering you a piece of cake and a cup of coffee. I don't even know whether there's something to drink in the cup of coffee. I guess the democracy you got over there is not so really thriving and wonderful at representing the spirit and the beauty of the people of Tahrir Square. And say that the old ones, that's not the model, it's about new stuff, and talking about mind print and heart print. If you got this stuff inside of you, and if you feel that chirping, fluttering, growling inside of you, congratulations. You have to also work on the heart, on the mind, and learn these methods of doing stuff together. But this is good for the heart print to start with. And then, I invite you to just check out Youth Leader magazine, which has manifestations of these inner heroes, angels, the Christs, totem animals, whatever people take as their ideals, inner mythology of heroes. Dumbledore's army, Harry Potter for real, or Lord of the Rings for real. And they're playing on the big screen with high resolution. The Changemakers in Youth Leader magazine, youth-leader.org, which has lots of young and old changemakers who are creating and putting their dreams into practice, like the really new generation. That's my fault.
Let me finalize with Gandhi, because Gandhi said democracy, nice idea, and his 7 deadly sins to society we have collected with Yehudi Menuhin, because it's very important. The book is called Culture of Refusal, saying no. We really have to go to Google, go to Wikipedia to check the death sins for society. And if you go deeper, and I really invite you to go deeper into traditions, then you find out that Rabindranath Tagore was something like a fatherly friend of Einstein and Gandhi. So you see, we have very, very rich history to explore and very, very rich futures to jointly build. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you too. Thank you guys, do something with it.
Ja, müssen wir sehen, was wir damit machen. Das ist zu dicht. Das muss man richtig bearbeiten und da 3 Videos draus machen.
30 oder so.
Ja, also ich glaube,
eigentlich ist das schön, das ist wie ein Vortrag.
Ja, ein dialogischer Vortrag.